Hi everyone, welcome or welcome back to my channel. I'm Amy, a special education teacher, a voracious reader, and someone who has really prioritized creating a culture of reading in her home. I have had some really interesting conversations over the past couple of months with people about why we should care about creating a culture of reading at home and how to do that, especially when kids become teenagers and they start to lose their interest in reading. And I want to start the video talking about some of the benefits of reading, but I don't want to spend too much time on that. We all know that reading is just so good for our kids and it helps them in so many ways. And there are studies out there, and I've read a bunch of books about the benefits of kids reading. And I was an English teacher for 14 years before becoming a special education teacher, and I'm still duly certified in both. So there's so much research that shows that, books really help to build empathy as well. And we see how, it really impacts their grades and their standardized test scores. And I really believe that to be true. I think some people are like, oh, that's really not the case. But I think it really is the biggest thing that you can do to help your kids have academic success. And I know this is just anecdotal, but this is just one example. So, in the state that I teach in, we have two different standardized tests that we do. And one of those tests we give out 3 times a year, once in the fall, once in the winter, and once in spring. And when I look at the data, typically what I'll see is that people will start off really low in the fall every year. And then they'll go up a little bit, or maybe they don't go up a bit in the fall. And then they go up more in the spring. And every case is individual, depending on if a child was sick that day or if they really just didn't care about taking the test. There are some who don't take it seriously. But for the ones that do take it seriously, I typically see the fall being the lowest score and either winter and spring being the higher score. And I really feel like that's because of the loss of learning that takes place between the spring and the fall. If you're going 2 full months without any kind of learning, that's going to impact you. And it just stuck out to me when I was going over the fall data with each student and kind of going over their scores with them and looking at their strengths and areas for improvement and making plans with them. One really stood out to me because his his winter and spring scores were low. And then he really shot up in the fall, which I rarely see. I mean, that's sort of an outlier situation. So I was curious and I asked him, I was like, did you do anything differently? Like, how do you account for your scores going up from the spring until now when we've been out of school for 2 months? Were you in any academic programs or doing any kind of workshops, or, what were you doing? And he just said that he read a ton over the summer, that he was never really a reader before, but he got a library card and he knew he had to do the summer reading, and he just really got into reading and he read a ton over the summer, and he's still reading independently. And I really do feel like that makes so much sense to me, because you're like, all of these tests are, I mean, there's a math component, but there's a heavy reading component. And the more that you read, even if you're just reading for pleasure, not academic texts, you're still exposing yourself to all of these words and all of these ideas. And your brain is still doing the same thing that it would do if you were reading in school with a teacher academically. You're still going to be thinking about what you're reading, analyzing the characters in your mind, visualizing, making predictions, trying to figure out words that you don't know by using context clues, and thinking about some of the themes and what is happening with the characters in the plot. So I just feel like helping your children to develop a love of reading is pretty much like I think, one of the biggest gifts that you can give to them in their lives. And I have fostered this love in my two sons since they were born. So I just wanted to talk about some of the things that I did to develop readers, because I know that some people are like, oh, my kids have always hated reading, or like, how do you get your kids to like reading? And I'm just going to talk about the ways that I did it, because there's like so many ways that you can do this, but I'm just going to take you through what I've done and some things I've had to change and think about as my kids have gotten older, because, developmentally, like, things shift. The type of things that they're reading and the way we read just changes. So the first and biggest thing that you can do to foster a culture of reading is simply to read yourself, to model that. My kids have always seen me read every single day of my life, of their lives without fail. And they've seen that I take a book with me everywhere I go. So if we've had to go to doctor's appointments or to events and there's any kind of waiting period, they are more likely to see me reading a book than being on my phone. If we're taking a long car ride, or if we are on a plane or at an airport or whatever, I'm reading a book. I'm not on my phone or doing something else. We might engage in play some like card games or whatever in between, but they see me reading so much every day. So by being someone who models reading, you're showing that reading is a value to you, that it's important to you. If they see you doing it, they'll know it's important to you. And it just inspires people to want to read as well. Not always, but there's other things that you can do if you're like, oh, I'm such a bookworm and nobody else in my family is. Well, what can I do? So I started off just reading out loud to my kids when they were very young, from the time they were babies, and we'd look at picture books and things like that. And then my son's kindergarten or first grade teacher, the only homework that he would get for a couple of years in elementary school was to just read 20 minutes a day and just like track that on a tracker. And I would, write the books down for him and just check off that like he had done the 20 minutes of reading. And I had contacted the teacher to ask what sort of constitutes as doing your 20 minutes of reading. Does it just have to be he has to be the one reading a book quietly to himself or reading out loud to me, or can I read to him? Like, what can this look like? And she said, any and all of the above. And that really worked well for us, because then that established a routine of always having 20 minutes a day for reading without fail. Even on summer vacation, we kept that up. So all through elementary school, my son's preference was for me to read to them. So whatever book they wanted to read, we would read for at least 20 minutes minimum. And sometimes it would go longer than that if the chapters took more than 20 minutes to read as they got older and the books got longer. And I'm really happy that we've done that, not just because it helped build that culture of reading, but because I hope that when they are adults and I'm no longer here on this planet, that they're able to think back on their childhood and really have that be like a strong memory for them, that they really enjoyed and appreciated that time that we spent together, because we had so much fun with this. And we have, sort of a neurodivergent family situation. So I often laugh to myself that our reading experience wouldn't look like what people think it looks like when I talk about it. So I imagine that when people are like, oh, you read bedtime stories to your kid, that's so wholesome. Like, and they imagine me sitting in between them and them just sitting there quietly and just, reading over my shoulder, and it's this peaceful thing. It was never that peaceful thing. And it's going to be stressful if you try to do this sometimes. It's not going to go the way you want it to, because most of the time they're bouncing up and down on the bed, they're pacing the room, they're wrestling around and fighting with each other, they're periodically talking through the book. And sometimes it got to a point where I'd either be like, okay, like we need to take a break for tonight. Like I'm done with this, which is fine. Or I'd just say, like, tell me what I just read to you to like prove that you were actually listening. And every time I asked that question, they could answer no problem. Like they knew they were actually listening. They just couldn't sit still to listen. So I had to get to a place where I just accepted that reading was going to look like people just walking all around my room and jumping up and down in the bed, but it was still really fun. And as they got older, I really appreciated that time too, because, you know, when you send your kids off to school, you don't really know, other than what they tell you in the work that you see in their folders or online, like what they're actually learning or doing or how much they're necessarily understanding. You just get like a grade on a report card. But by reading together, I was able to kind of see their growth and development, even though I wasn't being a teacher mom. I wasn't like, you know, using it as an opportunity to be their teacher. It really was just reading for pleasure. But because periodically they would just speak out loud as I was reading, and they would make a prediction and be like, "Oh, I bet this is what's going to happen next," or you know, if it ended on a cliffhanger, or they would ask questions about the text, and periodically they'd stop and be like, "Well, what does that word mean?" Or they'd be like, "Oh, I wonder why this character did that thing." Or if there was a plot twist in a reel, they were like, "Oh, that's why X, Y, and Z happened earlier. How did I not see that?" So it was really fun to just see, oh, how much like the sophisticated way that they were growing as readers, just having fun and doing this together, and me realizing like, oh, they really are learning these skills, and I'm getting to witness them practice them, but they don't know that they're practicing them. We're just doing this for fun. So definitely recommend reading out loud, and don't be afraid or feel like there needs to be a cutoff time for this, because I read to my oldest son, he wanted to stop around age 12. And my younger son is 11, and we still read aloud together. So don't feel like you need to stop because they've reached a certain age. Like, if they're enjoying it, let's just go for it. Like, just continue on with it. There's nothing wrong with that. So I would recommend that. And I think before I go on to the next, I'm just looking at my notes because I want to make sure I hit all my talking points. But I would say, I guess, segueing into that. So even though my older son, who's a teenager now, he doesn't want me reading out loud to him, that doesn't mean that we don't still engage in reading together. It just looks differently now. So I am going to talk about that more towards the end of the video, where I have some just thoughts and tips about teenagers reading, because it does shift even if they were a kid who really loved reading. And my older son was a voracious reader. He didn't just read with me in the evenings, he was reading all the time as well, and also taking books in the car and all those things. So the next I would say is access to books. And I understand that, like, having books in your home, you see my collection here, like, that's a real privilege. And this is a collection from pretty much over my lifetime. Like, this is over 20 years of books collected, because most of these are not my childhood books. This one here is like the only one from my childhood. So, and my kids both have bookshelves in their rooms as well. But I understand that it's a privilege because books are very expensive, but you don't have to buy new books, and you don't have to buy books all of the time. So we were not constantly buying books. We did do the Scholastic because that was something my mom always did for me. So I just liked that they would be able to pick out books at school. And we always did books for like holidays and birthdays. But we weren't constantly buying books because Another privilege we have is like living very close to our local library, and making a big deal of that was also something that really sort of helped, because when each of my kids got their first library card, we took a picture of them holding up their cards and just made a big deal out of this. And we went to the library all the time. And libraries are such great places, not just for books, but they offer so many more things now than they ever did when I was a kid. When you went there, it was just books and no talking. And it's still a quiet place to go, but now they have like activity programs and programming for kids, and they bring in guests who uh, we've had people come in who like show off different animals or different skills, and there's origami clubs. There's just like so many things. They had kids book clubs, so my kids participated in the kids book club, the weekly event. It might not have even been weekly, it might have been monthly, and they enjoyed that. And they you can even now like take out more than just books and movies. You can take out video games, you can take out board games. They have a seed library. Some of the libraries in our network, you can take out puzzles, which is great because puzzles are expensive too, and sometimes you just don't want a lot of stuff cluttering your house when you could just go to the library and take out a puzzle, do it, and bring it back. So just making the library like a part of the fabric of our lives also really helped with that, because it was nice to just, let them peruse the shelves and pick out what they wanted to read, and just the joy of like taking out books and bringing them back when you're done with them. That made a big difference as well. So I highly recommend taking advantage of any opportunities for bookish events or going to the library. You just have to research what's out there near you. Okay. And this also led us to going on what I would call like bookish adventures. And this is like really geeking out. But because our library system is a network of libraries, so if our library doesn't have a book, there's a ton of other libraries within our networks that will send the books to us. So because of that, that one library card works at all these different libraries. So when we were traveling about in our state, we would often like stop at these libraries and go into them, and it was like having a new adventure, because yes, it's a library, but it's a library that isn't familiar to us, and that was often fun to do. We also went on bookish adventures in terms of like when little libraries started popping up, because there was like a whole like website for them. So let's say we were out like just going on a family adventure or even just running errands. We were on the way back, we would take the scenic route and look up to see if there were any nearby little libraries. And we'd always keep some books in our car that we were like finished with or that we just didn't want to keep, so that we could make the swaps out. So it was fun to just kind of stop at these little libraries along the way and just see what they had to offer and make these swaps. So that's a fun activity to do as well that my kids really enjoyed. We also, and this is also a very privileged thing to do, because I know that not everyone has access to travel or can take vacations that are out of state or out of the country. We've only been out of the country one time as a family, and we went to the library in that country, and that was really fun. And anytime we go out of state for a vacation, we always go to their libraries, or we find used bookstores or other independent bookstores. And it's just been really fun, because then they get to look forward to, like, we always try to plan to see what bookstores are in the area, and then we can pick up a book like usually the day we land before we go to wherever we're going to stay, and then we can buy a book, and then we have something to read. So just not letting my sons have like phones and iPads also made a difference. Like they had access to an iPad growing up, but it wasn't something that they were allowed to like have all day long. And like we didn't let them use it in the car, and they weren't allowed to use our phones in the car. So the car is also a great place for reading, because they had to bring books with them, or else they were going to be bored and just look out the window, and that's fine. But also when we would take road trips or when we would vacation and have a rental car, we would just pick an audio book to listen to for the week that we'd all listen to as a family. And that was really fun. So I recommend that as well. So anytime we were like at an airport or even just like waiting anywhere, like they would have to read or play games. So then they're not competing with the electronics. That's not to say that we were perfect, because there was a time that our flight was like heavily delayed to the point of like almost being canceled. And we were at the airport like all day, and with two kids with a lot of energy, that at one point, like, we did have to hand over the phones and let them play games with them, and that's fine. But anything you can do to sort of minimize the competition with technology, I think really helps as well. And yeah, so just making audiobooks also a part of the family culture. So when we do puzzles together, we do like to do puzzles in the evenings. That's when we often even still, we listen to audiobooks now. So instead of me reading to them, because they're kind of over that, we just listen to the books together that they want to read. So we actually just finished reading Harry Potter and Order of the Phoenix last night. So we are going to start up with the last book, and we've been working on this really fun like horror themed puzzle as a family. So that's something I recommend, is just picking an audiobook, letting them pick. I don't pick for them. And we usually also like connect it to things that they want to watch. This is another great strategy as well, especially as they get older and maybe become more reluctant to read, as my teenager has, which was making me like so sad, because he's in 8th grade now and going to be going into 9th grade. And I've been starting here, oh, reading is boring. So as they get older, depending on the age in the child and what your values are or whatever, you do have to be able to negotiate in a way. And I'm not talking about like bribery, like, oh, if you read, I'll give you money or candy or whatever, things like that. No, but in terms of being able to step outside your comfort zone of what they're reading. Or, so let me just give an example, because I think I'm getting off track here. So my kids would want to watch certain movies, for example, even if they were fine movies. But we would always kind of make a rule of, let's read the book first, because the book is always better and it's always different. And that has really helped things, because now this weekend we're going to watch Harry Potter and Order of the Phoenix. And my son is really looking forward to that. He loves when we do that. We did the same thing with the Percy Jackson, the first book, and then we watched the Disney Plus show. So that really helps things. But with my older son, he's wanted to push the envelope with his reading a bit. And I've had to like let him do that. So he just finished reading Carrie and Misery this past month, and he wants to watch those movies. And they are rated R, but he is going on 14. And I also watched a lot of horror movies when I was on the youngish end of being a teenager, but like within reason. Like I wasn't watching like Freddy Krueger or things like that at like 13 and 14, but by the time I was 15, 16, yes. So, I might feel a little bit uncomfortable with some of that, but we're going to watch Misery this weekend. We watched the 2013 version of Carrie, because that's what he wanted to watch instead of the original, but I'm still hoping to get him to watch the original. So you do have to kind of make some consensus here. And that also leads me into another talking point. Beyond just establishing routines and a culture of reading, is also really allowing your kids to read whatever they want with like minimal judgment. So I have my younger son has always been more of a reluctant reader. Like he enjoys it, but he likes when we're listening to audiobooks or I'm reading to him. I still have yet to see him read a novel in our home. When he does read independently, he loves graphic novels, and that is what he chooses to read. And I make conscious choices that I found a lot of great nonfiction books that I think would be interesting to him that are in graphic novel form. That's not to say that I never like offer him a novel, and he does take them to school and says he reads them. I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, I know he reads novels in school that are being taught, but his preference is graphic novels. They always have been. And I don't say to him, like, oh, you really need to start reading novels, because I just feel like graphic novels are still reading. And in fact, they also offer some really interesting complexity with the pictures. So I think graphic novels can sometimes get a bad rap. And we also read all of the Dogman series together in the Cat Kid Comic Club series by Dave Pilkey. And I'd say these series are fantastic. I know, like, the Captain Underpants one is a little bit like, okay, but the other two series, they are perfect for parents and kids to read together. I even enjoyed rereading a couple of the Cat Kid Comic Club books by myself, because I feel like they offer a lot of the humor that the kids would like, but they also offer like a lot of really complex, interesting themes for adults. I think his books are excellent and really smart, and they're great for kids, but I think they're also great for adults and have a lot to offer. So I don't think that people should be looking down on graphic novels as less than a regular novel. Um, Other things that I would say about that as well is, being willing to, negotiate with your kids about what they're reading. So my older son now, because he does play a horror video game with me, they have released new skins for the survivors and killers in that game based on Junji Ito. I think I'm pronouncing that right, but he is a horror graphic novel creator from Japan. So my son is now asking, well, can I read these books? I do my due diligence. I'm always like looking into what, you know, my kids want to read, and trying to look at like the age ratings for them and figuring out, what's in some of these books, just because I want to know. I think that's sort of important, but it doesn't necessarily detract me. So, in looking at his extensive list of books, there were two that I felt were really inappropriate for his age group. And we talked about that, and those were a no. But there were a lot of them that I felt comfortable letting him try out. I think the name of the one that he just finished reading yesterday was Uzumaki, I think. So, and I had looked through that one before I handed it over because we picked it up from the library. So you have to be willing to sort of meet them where they are, and, let them read things that, even if you're feeling like, oh, I don't really know if this is the right thing to do because, there's X, Y, and Z in these books. Speaking from my own like personal experience, my parents were just happy I was reading, and they weren't the biggest readers. My mom was more into reading true crime, which probably explains why I love horror books. I don't know. But anyways, so they never were like looking into what I was reading. And I know that when I was a teenager, looking back now, like there were a lot of questionable books that I read at that time, that actually kind of make me cringe now and think like, oh, those really weren't appropriate for my age group at all. But I turned out just fine, I think. So I don't think it's the biggest deal in the world, but you do have to do what you feel comfortable with and what's in alignment with your family. But I feel like having these conversations are really important as well, because I was able to have a sit down conversation with my son before we went to the library to pick out those graphic novels, to talk about what I was comfortable with him reading and what I wasn't, and able to talk about why I wasn't comfortable with some of the book choices and what I thought was reasonable, and have his perspective as well. And I think it's just great to be able to have those conversations about books and why someone feels that something is appropriate. And I think it just teaches a lot of great skills about communication and compromise and negotiations. And, when he's able, and this has happened throughout his life, that sometimes I kind of question if something is appropriate for his age group or whatever. And I'm doing my own research. But when he's able to articulate to me why he should be able to watch something, read something, or do something that I might be feeling uncomfortable with, that's a really valuable skill, because there have been times where he's been able to express himself to me in a way that does make sense, and he's able to actually get what he wants. So I just feel like it's a win-win situation, and I just think it's valuable to be able to have open communication about books and TV and movies and just anything. I think it's okay to have conflicts, or not be in agreement, and still be able to get along and not have it be an argument. I just think, yeah, that's just something that I personally value and think is a positive thing. So the last thing that I want to talk about in this sort of realm I've been talking about, of letting kids read what they want to read, is that there has been some interesting conversations at work recently about making kids read books that are within their Lexile or above. And this goes back to what I was saying about the graphic novels as well. I actually don't agree with that. I don't feel that just because you find out from your kids' school testing that they should be reading that level or higher to challenge themselves and push themselves. If you heard that weird sound, that was my dog sighing on the floor. That sounded so weird. But, anyways, I don't feel like we should be putting that pressure on kids and making reading into something that's a challenge when it's for independent reading. So I think it's great to challenge kids in school academically when they're in school. But I feel like if you just want to promote reading for the sake of reading, because reading is something that's great to do, then I don't think making kids read at their level or higher is necessarily like the goal. I feel like it's the goal should just be to enjoy what you're reading. And that said, if a kid has an interest in a book that's even above their reading level ability, I would encourage that as well, and just, find ways to make that work, whether you're each taking turns reading a page or reading it together or listening to it on audio. I just feel like kids have enough parameters on them and demands on them all day at school, and the things that we're asking them to do, that once again, like, reading should just be this fun thing. I mentioned this in a previous video, even just thinking about the way that I'm approaching reading for myself. And it shouldn't be something that you are putting pressure on, that you want your kids to read a certain number of books a year, a month, whatever, or want them to read certain books also that they might not be reading in school, but you got to read as an adult. Like, you can always encourage or make suggestions, but I think ultimately the goal should just be to have your kid become an avid reader who enjoys reading and will pick that up over something else. And that's not to say, like I said, that my kids are in that space where they're just gleefully picking up their books. They used to, when they were little, they really looked forward to their reading time, both their own independent books and the reading time we spent together. They're in middle school now, and it's all about the social life, the friends, the video games. Everything else but reading is a priority. So just having it be, we're doing our 20 minutes of reading as a family and we all just stop what we're doing and set a timer, they don't always love that. They don't like getting off their computers or whatever to do that. But I can tell you that even though we set the timer for 20 minutes, when the timer goes off, they're not automatically shutting that book and running off. Actually, the way we set it up, by the time that we do that, screens are going to be done for the rest of the evening anyway. But most of the time, I'll see that they will continue reading until the end of the chapter at least. And sometimes they go upstairs to bed and they continue reading their book until they're ready to fall asleep. So they might not always be looking forward to starting that reading, but they do enjoy what they're reading and will continue on with that. So it's not a preference at this time that they will automatically choose a book over some other activity. Okay, so but I think the goal is just for this age group with middle school and high school is just to build consistency and get them over that hump, because I do see that kids really do enjoy reading in elementary school, and I pretty much have taught 8th and 9th grade, and by that point there's very few people who I see like with their nose in a book like I was in high school. Whenever there's downtime, most people will say, "Oh, I haven't read a book since Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and books are boring and I don't like them." So I try to make things as enjoyable and easy as I can to keep my kids in the habit of reading so they can kind of get over that middle school slump. And then hopefully the goal is that when they're adults, they will still want to pick up books in the future. But if they don't, I really can't do anything about that. It would make me sad for them, but they will be adults who can make their own decisions. But at least while they were under my roof, we had a culture of reading, and we really built really nice memories of that experience. And like I said, we still listen to audiobooks while we do family puzzles and things like that. So those are just all of the thoughts that I've had about, raising kids to be readers. I'm curious if any of these seemed interesting to you, or you might give them a shot, or please let me know what creative ways or tips you have for me for how you kept your kids engaged in reading, especially as they became teenagers, because I'm always looking for more ways to get my kids to want to pick up those books. And I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please consider giving it a thumbs up, and hopefully you'll subscribe for more of my content. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks. Bye.